All right, we're going to begin with our next four pieces of our curriculum. And this is going to be where, because of keeping with the chronological timeline, we start to bounce around a little bit within our prescribed units from the AP. But our first piece will still be from our prehistoric Unit 1. The next piece we look at will be from Unit 2 as it falls chronologically in this time frame. And then the final two pieces will be within our Unit 1 going back. And basically why this is happening is because we're now moving into a Neolithic era where early civilizations are beginning to spring up, and we're starting to now have some of that written language to provide evidence for what some of these pieces are and what these cultures are. So to begin with, we're going to look at this piece from Unit 1, bushel with Ibex motif, or beaker with Ibex motif. And again, this is from our prehistoric unit, so we do not have any written evidence as to what this is for, but we are using context surrounding where it was found to make inferences about what it was used for and what it was intended for and what it means. This was found in Susa, Iran, and is dated around 4200 to 3500 BCE. And so this, I said the location was Susa, Iran, but in fact, ancient Susa would have been found in what is today known as Iraq location. And again, as I was saying, what's really interesting about this time period is that we're falling right at the cusp of the Neolithic and historic area that's just before the rise of Mesopotamia. So about 6,000 to 4,000 BCE is right around where Mesopotamia is beginning to become a thing. We're just before that, or just around where that's going to begin happening. So looking at this piece, this was found buried in a cemetery in Susa. And it's believed, because of where it was found, that they would bury their dead with these beakers or pots. It's really unknown why. The religion is not really known to us. The gods and goddesses that were worshipped at this time at the Temple Mound were not really known to us. And so it's hard to really say why we have some of this imagery occurring, why this was placed with the dead, but this is where this piece was found. Looking at the content of the piece first, we have in the center here this little circular motif with geometric patterns, and in this large central rectangle we have the form of a goat, a mountain goat, and it's occupying this large rectangle. The body is made up of two arches with these sort of triangular forms for the body part, these very thin little legs. And then the horns, which create this giant sphere taking up the most of this space. It's very stylized in that it's broken into these very simple shapes, but it is very detailed looking closely. You have the hairs on the chin of the goat, the hairs on the tail, as well as little eyes and things like that added on. You can also make out, if you look very closely, his ears at the top of his head, his snout, things like that. Just above the rectangle that holds this goat inside, we have these elongated figures that are kind of create a band going around the midsection of this beaker. And they look to be in the form of what would have been, or what is similar to sort of a greyhound dog. We have the head of the dog here with the ears, this elongated body with these legs, two legs folded beneath here, two legs out front here, and perhaps, I think this tail got cut off. You can kind of see the tail hook around over here, but you would have had your tail right here. Just above, we have another geometrical linear band. And then this section here, we have another type of animal. We have a bird, sort of this body and tail, long legs with this really elongated, stylized neck and head. So we have three different animal figures here in our space. Looking at form as it relates to these animal shapes, we have sort of a combination of circular forms balancing with more linear ones. And we have a balance between geometric and hard-edged forms like rectangles with these very curving circular spherical shapes as well, repeated in the body of the animal, of the goat, the archway underneath his legs. And using these rounded elements, it really speaks to the cylindrical shape of the vessel, the rounded shape of the vessel as a whole. And these more linear vertical elements speak to the verticality and height of the piece. They really emphasize that those elements of this form. We also have a really unique way that the artist has paired the curving of these, of the antlers, as well as the curving of the dog's tail. They are, if you look closely, and it's hard to see because this tail is broken off, but they do curve in opposite directions, which creates a nice sense of balance to the piece as well. It is unknown why these animals were chosen. Perhaps they are significant religiously, again with, maybe the burial ritual, something along those lines. But again, because this is prehistoric, we do not have actual data that tell us why these animals and these motifs were included. Just something I want to add for materials and technique. This pot is a handmade coil pot, or perhaps even a slab pot, which you might be familiar with from 3D1 classes. They were handmade and painted. They're very thin and imperfect, not like something you would throw on a wheel. And so these were hand built rather than, something a little more refined. Our next work is the one we are going to jump into our Unit 2 content area for. This is the White Temple and its ziggurat. This is Sumerian and found in Uruk, UK. And this is from around 3,517 to about 3,358 BCE. And Sumer and Uruk are in what is modern-day Warqa, Iraq. Here's a little map here. So this is where we're located, right here, right sort of almost at the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates River coming together here. So we are right in smack in Mesopotamia. Let's go to function and purpose. A ziggurat, which is the mound here below, this is a built and raised platform. And they were not only a visual focal point of the city, but they were also a symbolic focal point. They were the heart of a theocratic political system. Theocracy, Theocracy, was the type of government in this area at the time, and it's a type of government where a god is recognized as the ruler of the area, and then state officials operate on that god's behalf. So priests and things like that would operate on the god's behalf, but the god was considered the king of the land. This ziggurat towered approximately 40 feet high with sloping sides like a chopped off pyramid. The rectangular corners here, 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 and on the far side were oriented towards the cardinal points. Cardinal points, which is something that's going to come up, are your north, south, east, and west. Those are your cardinal points. This structure was a typical Uruk tripartite plan or high temple plan, where you had, looking at the inside of the temple now, you had a long hallway in the center with rooms on either side of that long hallway. The three entrances, here, here, and here, none of them face the ziggurat ramp directly. Ramp and stairs located here, coming up to the White Temple, so that the individual visiting would have to walk around the temple to gain access to the interior. The person entering the temple would enter on what was known as a bent axis, so that when they entered, you would kind of come around a corner at 90 degrees and have to face the altar, which was very typical for these temples in the Near East at the time. Here's another cross section of the temple where you can see that long hallway, the altar space, and the doorways into your offshoot rooms. Here also is an image of the ramp with the stairs up to the top where the temple was. The White Temple in Ziggurat is made of mud brick, which was a building material of choice in the Near East. Stone was very rare, and it would have taken around 1,500 laborers working an average of 10 hours a day, about 5 years to complete the entire structure. The temple itself on this ziggurat would have towered over the flat plains of Uruk and have been visible at a great distance. The sides of the ziggurat, as you can kind of see in this first image, were very broad and sloping, but would have had these sort of diagonal lines sort of recessed into the surface as stripes. The only way to the top was a steep stairway that would lead to a ramp that wrapped around the north end of the ziggurat and would bring you to the temple entrance. The flat top where you would walk on the ziggurat here was covered in bitumen, which is sort of like an asphalt or a tar, and it was then overlaid with brick, which made it firm and waterproof as the foundation for the temple. The entire outside of the temple was whitewashed so that it would be, very dazzling and eye-catching in the sunlight. Inside the temple itself, there were very few objects. There was obviously the altar, but underneath the floor, there were also some items found, about 19 tablets made of gypsum, and all of them had a cylindrical seal that reflected the temple's accounting. So they were sort of offerings given to the temple, and someone had kept record of each of these objects that were donated to the temple. It was also uncovered inside of the temple a foundation deposit of bones of a leopard and a lion in the east corner. Foundation deposits we're going to see many times as we move forward, especially in the earlier religions, they were ritually buried objects and bones. And the reasons why these objects were ritually buried was because once they were donated or given to a temple, they would become consecrated, they would become holy. And so to dispose of them was a sin. So you would have to, once you gathered up too many things, you would bury them under the floors of the temple because they were sacred pieces. What I would just like for you to make a note of is for innovation, this built temple structure was an innovation at the time. We're having, instead of going into caves, now we're actually building religious structures. The theocratic government, this specific one was dedicated to the sky god Anu, A-N-U. That would have been a big innovation moving into the Mesopotamian, or not Mesopotamian, Neolithic era. A convention that you can make note of is the tripartite high temple plan, which was popular in this area, and also the bent axis entry, where you would have to come around a corner and turn to face the altar when you entered the temple, so that you were focusing on the god that was housed in the temple. So that piece was from our unit 2, as we're starting to have our civilizations pop up. But we're actually going to now go back in time a little bit to unit 1 again. This is in our Neolithic era, but again, we don't have very much scholarly proof to give us evidence as to what this was used for. This is a Jade Cong. This is from 3,300 to 3,300 to 2,200 BCE. This is Neolithic. This is from China, the Liangzhu, China. And this is made of carved jade. A Kong is a square hollow tube that was decorated with lines and sometimes circles that represent faces. And you can see really faintly on the edge here, maybe here a little bit clearer, some of those faces. You have eyes on either side, this line for sort of a mouth. But this is sort of the tube cylinder shape. Some were very short, others were tall. So you had varying heights and also varying degrees of regularity. All were very finely detailed and typically had vertical repetitions of horizontal lines. So lines sort of stacked on top of each other going horizontally. This is made of true jade or nephrite, and it's extremely hard to work with. And so the Liangzhu culture didn't have really the proper tools at the time to carve the jade. So they would produce these by actually rubbing sand to sort of shape the pieces. So it was very intensive labor-wise. It's difficult to tell in these images, but the Kong has clearly represented faces, possibly monster or animal or human faces. It's really unknown, but they are symbols also combined with other symbols, as well as uniformity, intentionality in the way that the elements, the visual elements are kind of added onto the outside of the Kong. And it was also made using a tremendous amount of effort, as we talked about, with having to rub the outside of the jade with sand to achieve the shape. A little bit about the Liangzhu culture. They were a very sophisticated Neolithic culture found around the modern Shanghai and Yangtze rivers at the delta. They were expert rice growers, and the river allowed them to irrigate crops, which made them able to create a surplus of rice, so they didn't have to worry about eating, and that allowed them more time to pursue artistic endeavors or psychological endeavors. They were known for producing jade objects, and these specific Kongs were found in graves. Sometimes there were many placed within a single grave. The Kong would also be accompanied with a bi, a bi. This is an example of a bi. And it was a round disc shape with holes in the center. We don't really have any idea of the meaning because there's no written evidence about what these were utilized for or what the meaning of them are. But it's thought that maybe they are about power or a relationship to nature and the spiritual world, or even the afterlife. It's suggested that the rectilinear quality, the rectangular quality of the Kong is symbolic of the earth, with the round interior a symbol of the sky, the heavens, and the sun. Moving from the Liangzhu, China, we are going to look at our last piece for today. This is the Anthropomorphic Stele from the 4th millennium BCE, so around 4000 BCE. And this is made of sandstone. This piece is about 3 feet in height. And it was found in a small village near Hyle in northwestern Saudi Arabia, which is right here. This was one of 3 discovered in the region, one of over 60 found that were dated to the 4th millennium BCE, and all of them share certain features and characteristics despite the distance of the territories where they were found. So this really speaks to this travel and sort of sharing of ideas going on between different areas. Here is the stele with the other 2 that were found in the area as well. A stele is a vertical stone monument or marker that is often inscribed with texts or relief carvings. And so you can see these relief carvings here. Both sides are sculpted, but there's an emphasis on the front, specifically on the face, the chest, and the waist. We have sort of a trapezoidal head that's resting on squared shoulders. And also we have the outlines of face with close set eyes, a flat nose, and sort of the outline or the impression of a robe or a necklace kind of hanging around the neck and bottom of the head area here. We also have 2 cords that are going diagonally across the torso of the figure with what's known as an awl, AWL, which is a small pointed tool attached at the waist here. Just below that, we have a double-bladed dagger that is hanging from a wide belt at the waist. The stele is very simple and abstract, but from these very simple markings, we have the impression of a stylized human figure. Now, all these features are very common visual repertoire for this region. But I want to talk about how what we're seeing ties into what's going on in the world. At this point, the Saudi Arabian landscape is very fertile and lush, more like a savanna than a desert. And groups of hunters and gatherers are gradually shifting to more from a predatory hunter-gatherer kind of lifestyle to a lifestyle of production, the domestication of animals and farming, and they're settling down into these areas. It's only kind of temporary due to a changing climate. So they would occupy these areas very seasonally, but they would come back to them repeatedly. So we're starting to move into more of a settled sort of community. This constant need for movement, however, because of the changing climate, simulates communication between different regions and interactions among societies that might not have really, interacted in the past. And it allows for these ideas and objects to move around with the people. So we're seeing these steles with similar attributes found in places like northern Jordan, as well as southern Jordan down at the lower border of Saudi Arabia. And so what I would like you to just make sure you make a note of for innovation and change is how we're having evidence of a travel of ideas because of this emergence in trade and the similarity between our anthropomorphic stele to others found at the same time in different locations. And that's going to wrap up our 4 pieces for today. Any questions, again, please, make note of them and we will discuss them tomorrow.